Hello everyone, what is up? It is me, AlbyMTG. For today's video, we'll be taking a look at 6 MTG Finance specs that I picked out. We are halfway through Core Set 2020 spoiler season. We are at 120.20 of 280, so a little bit under half, but we're close enough to half that I can say half. And I'm going to go ahead and just pick out talk about some of the specs that I'm thinking of. A lot of the cards actually that were previewed today influenced the decisions, the rationale behind me choosing some of the cards that I ended up choosing. I'm going to talk about some of the things that I've looked for as I, have thought about what specs I'm interested in potentially going for. So when we take a look at some of the cards that stood out to me, we'll start off with today's spoilers, June 2020 here. Some of the cards that stood out to me were the Lotus Field, which has also stood out quite a bit to other people as well. Steel Overseer, that's about a $15 card that's getting reprinted. Very, very good card. Another few cards, of course, the Cavalier Cycle has been there as well. But really, the main cards that stood out to me were the Overseer, the new Lotus Veil card. The Marauding Raptor stood out as well because it combos very nicely with the Polyraptor, but Polyraptor has already kind of gone up in price. People are already buying into that hype because you can potentially draw out a game if you have Polyraptor plus Marauding Raptor. So a lot of people have already kind of bought into that. I'm not super sold on it because I don't know how long people are going to just want to draw games, but oh well. Another thing that stood out to me was the interaction with Field of the Dead, along with another card that we'll be talking about here that's currently legal in Standard. But overall, there are just a bunch of, very interesting cards that are here throughout this. Of course, the Leyline reprints as well. Leyline of the Void is here. Goblin Ringleader, a nice eternal staple for Goblins decks that is getting reprinted here. So we'll go ahead and talk about some of these. The first three that I picked out are just kind of like no-brainers. I think that they're just very easily going to go up and that they're very safe specs as well. Then the last three that we're going to talk about here are more of I don't want to say riskier specs, but I guess they technically are. I feel like they're still strong picks, but they are technically riskier because they're not basically guaranteed to go up like the first three are. So the first one we have here is Sigh Master Thopterus. You can already see Sigh is already on the uptick here. Sigh works very well in Modern, where he already sees a ton of play. You can go ahead and come down here and see the Thopter Sword, Deseret Control, even some Legacy and Vintage stuff here, War Control as well in Modern. So this is the kind of card that I like speccing into. The fact that it has modern playability to go along with the fact that it could start seeing play here in Standard very soon. As we see Steel Overseer getting previewed, there is most likely going to be some sort of an artifact deck that people are going to try to put together. Sigh has done well in the past in Standard already with the Paradoxical Outcome decks, where you try and cast a bunch of artifacts spells, and so you'll be doing basically the same thing except focusing more on artifact creatures with the Steel Overseer. I like that with Sigh, though, you can really get that go-wide strategy going, which is where Steel Overseer really shines. So if you do something like turn 2 Steel Overseer, turn 3 Sigh, you're setting yourself up to be in a very good position to next turn potentially just lay out 2 more artifact creatures or something like that, and then put +1/+1 counters on all of those creatures with the Steel Overseer. Sigh gives you the ability to have some late game potential as well. Normally when we think about Steel Overseer decks, we think about Hardened Scales Affinity, and we think about regular Affinity for Modern, which are very aggressive, fast decks, but having something like Sigh does give you that longevity in case you are going up against, more of a mid-range grindy strategy or potentially even a control strategy. Having the ability to make these stopper tokens, maybe even draw some cards too, because you have that secondary ability there on Sigh, gives you a lot of play. And so I think that for the artifact-based decks that we're going to be seeing in Standard, Sigh is going to be a staple in them. My guess for colors is that they're going to be blue-white, but I could also just see mono-blue again. We have things like Sigh, Steel Overseer. You have the card from M19 as well that was a 1-mana 1/2, but if you control an artifact, it gets +1/+0, so then it's a 1-mana 2/2. So if you do want to go more of the aggressive route, you have the potential to do that for these artifact cards. And even then, for those kind of decks, Sigh would still be a great sideboard choice if you're not choosing to go more of a mid-range strategy. For the sideboard, Sigh could still be perfect for that. So I really like choosing Sigh. As you guys can see here, it has started to go up a little bit already, and I think that Sigh is just going to continue to go up. Next one, again, we have Scape Shift here. Scape Shift works really well with the card that I said that I would talk about here in just a second. We'll go ahead back up here to Field of the Dead. Field of the Dead here enters the battlefield taps to add a colorless, and whenever Field of the Dead or another land enters the battlefield under your control, if you control 7 or more lands with different names, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So what this reminded me a lot of, seeing that when Field of the Dead or another land enters the battlefield under your control, and then if you control 7 or more lands with different names, seeing that reminded me a lot of these Scape Shift decks in Modern, where basically the way Scape Shift decks win is with Scape Shift plus, 7 lands, because then you can go find your Vallecuts and your mountains to get all those Valleca triggers. And then with Field of the Dead, you'll be able to do the same thing here in Standard now, where with Field of the Dead plus with Scape Shift plus 7 lands, you cast a Scape Shift, find your Field of the Dead along with 6 other lands that have different names, and you get to make 7 2/2 black zombie creature tokens right on the spot. 4 mana for 14 power and 14 toughness for the zombie tokens seems pretty good to me. And then of course you can have some other different things that you can do as well, like maybe you're just kind of a ramp strategy with the Field of the Dead plan as sort of like your backup, and maybe you also just have some other, since you're going to be putting out so many lands, maybe you have some other big creatures that you're hoping to cast as well, and then just kind of like the backup win condition could be like, oops, I got 14 power and 14 toughness worth of zombies out of nowhere, sort of thing. But another thing to point out about Scape Shift is that it was already on the rebound here. So this is the kind of card that sees play in Modern. Like I said, the idea from the this card, the Lake of the Dead, or not Lake of the Dead, Field of the Dead, was that it works similarly to the Modern Scape Shift decks. So even if you pick up these Scape Shifts here, they will have some long-term potential for them as well, because they are a staple in Modern as well. As you can see here, Scape Shift, the red-green decks, some Through the Breach Scape Shift decks, and as well as the Bring to Light Scape Shift decks as well. And so I think Scape Shift is, again, a fairly reasonable pick. Most likely price could drop a little bit once rotation hits and M19 goes out, but this seems like one of the cards that might actually not drop that much. Same thing goes with Crucible of Worlds, where the majority of their play comes from their play in Eternal formats, and so with standard rotation happening, that won't really affect the price too much. And so I think picking up Scape Shift now would be a really good idea, especially if you're hoping to sell them off to maybe some standard players looking to do the standard Scape Shift decks, or just holding on to them for a little bit and then selling them off to some modern players later on. Again, we have another sort of safe pick here. This is Mauve Nexus. Obviously, most of the cards that we're going to be talking about here are standard. Mauve Nexus obviously is not standard legal, has the infect mechanic, but again, with the printing of Steel Overseer, one of the things that I wanted to look at in terms of these potential picks was cards that Steel Overseer normally gets played with. So in Modern, the Steel Overseer is played in Affinity, and it's played in Hardened Scales, and so I wanted to pick a card for the list that, since the value of Steel Overseer would go down, you would end up seeing some other cards that are in those two decks increasing in price, and I think Mauve Nexus is a great choice. So when we think about, going back to actually the last card that we just talked about, when we talked about Scape Shift here, if we go ahead and look at the price on Valleca, the Molten Pinnacle, really quickly, Valleca, the Molten Pinnacle. There we go. So if we take a look at the price right in here, this is the M19 spoiler season. So right here, when Scape Shift was spoiled, Valleca went from $8.88 market up to about $19, $20, somewhere in that point. And you can see it's still pretty much up to about $15 or so. So once the big card that was taken out of the Scape Shift decks was gone, they needed somewhere else for the value to go, so that people weren't just, building the Scape Shift decks for, next to nothing now. And so that value ended up being the Valleca increasing in price. And so I think we're going to see the same thing for these cards in the decks that Steel Overseer saw play in. So the one that I picked out was Mauve Nexus, because it sees play in the Hardened Scales deck and in the Affinity deck, so it has that overlap between the two Steel Overseer decks. And it's also just getting much better. Infect in Modern is great. Personally, that's what I'm playing right now, and I went 3-0-6-0 with it in the last tournament that I played with it. That was the first time I got to try out Scale Up, and Scale Up is disgusting. So I think the Mauve Nexus, as well as just Infect in general, are going to be putting up better results here in Modern, which I think could lead to a higher price on the Mauve Nexus, as well as the fact that we'll be getting the London Mulligan soon as well, which does help out the Infect decks even more, and could also even help out the Affinity decks and the Hardened Scales decks, because they let you dig for the important cards in the Affinity matchups, as well as digging for your Hardened Scales if you're a Hardened Scales player. So I think Mauve Nexus definitely has the chance to go up, and most likely will. I don't know where it'll stop, though. I don't know if this is going to be the kind of card that will re-reach the top point here at about $40. My guess is we'll see, I'm going to guess 32 to 35 is potentially where we could see the Mauve Nexus. I think it's really going to depend on how much success the Infect decks, as well as the other Mauve Nexus decks in general, are going to have at the competitive level, especially once the London Mulligan comes around. Next three cards that we have here on the list are a little bit more risky because they're not just kind of guaranteed to go up as we've seen from these first three. But we'll go ahead and start off here with Deseret Artifice Master. Again, this is another card that I think is a reasonable spec because of the price, the entry point in it being fairly low. $6 for a good Mythic Planeswalker seems pretty reasonable. The fact that it sees play in Commander in those artifact-based Commander decks is good, and I think that this is going to be another card that just ends up doing very well with these Steel Overseer artifact decks in Standard. Having, a nice card to create the Thopter tokens, which works very well with the Steel Overseer, making these flyers that can become bigger off of the Steel Overseer activations, as well as having the Zero ability that just lets you draw cards in case you're against, the control matchup and you just need to try and outcard advantage your opponent potentially, and just keep getting more resources to refill up the board after board wipes or removal spells, something like that. I really like the chances of Deseret seeing play in the upcoming Standard, and I think that this is a fine point to get into it. You can see the all-time low on this card was $5.84, so we're up about $1 here in terms of the market price over the all-time low, and so I really think that right now could be a fine time to start investing in the Deserets. I think that they're going to go up as well. Maybe not very much. You can see that they are, well, maybe not very much up until, let's say, maybe like a year or two from now. I don't think that they're going to go up too much in terms of if the Steel Overseer hadn't been printed. I think it would follow the same kind of curve and then maybe eventually reach, $8 to $9, something like that, a little while down the road, like in a year or two. But I think with the Steel Overseer, you're going to see that this growth is going to become much more rapid, and that the Deseret could be a great spec. After Deseret, we have Blood Sun. So Blood Sun works very well with a card that just got spoiled, literally 7:13 now, so about 25 to 30 minutes ago at the time that I'm making this video. Blood Sun works very, very well with the Lotus Field. So Lotus Field here has hexproof, enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, you sacrifice 2 lands, and then taps to add 3 mana of any one color. So Lotus Field, is going to be a pretty interesting land. It depends on how relevant this sacrifice 2 lands is going to be. We do have cards that care about sacrificing lands, though. If we take a look at something like the Elvish Reclaimer, potentially you have Elvish Reclaimer gets +2/+2 as long as there are 3 or more land cards in your graveyard, and then 2 tap, sacrifice a land, search your library for a land card, put it onto the battlefield, tap, shuffle your library. So the Elvish Reclaimer could potentially be a 1-mana 3/4 if you get some lands in your graveyard. Potentially also works with Scape Shift as well as a way to put more land cards in your graveyard. So that's something to keep in mind with this sacrifice ability for enters the battlefield, sacrifice 2 lands. But when we take a look at the Blood Sun, when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. So 3-mana cantrip at worst. Fine, I guess. Obviously not good, but fine. All lands lose all abilities except mana abilities. So when we come back and take a look at the Lotus Field then just reads land, tap, add 3 mana of any one color, which is very, very good. You don't get the hexproof anymore, which is the one upside of this card, but you also don't get the downside of entering the battlefield tapped or the downside of sacrificing 2 lands, and all you have to do is play this Blood Sun in order to have that happen. There are a few other cards that people have pointed out that work kind of well with it, but I do like the Blood Sun as a choice because it is very low entry point, 50 cents here at market price, and does see some sideboard play. Here you can see Legacy Eldrazi, as well as sometimes it'll see Modern sideboard play too, because it is good against Tron as well. So the Blood Sun, I think, is a fine pickup. Even at 50 cents, this could potentially, even if it just goes up to like $1 or $1.50, something like that, just off of this interaction with the Lotus Field, that could still be a fairly good profit. That's an increase of like quite a bit when you think about potentially picking up, say, 20 copies of this card for $10 or 40 copies of this card for $20, something like that. Then you're looking at that 50 cents going up to $1.50 being very significant in terms of your returns. So I like the Blood Sun here as another pickup. And the final one that we'll talk about for today is the Legion Warboss. So I really like Legion Warboss, both in the fact that it's a card that already sees play, good card, and the fact that it's getting a little bit better here as we talk about the cards that are getting printed, and as we look forward to the future of what Standard could be in about I guess it would be in about 3 months. So we have Core Set 2020 here. This gets better because of the Goblin Ringleader. If we can go ahead and find Ringleader, I believe it was on the right-hand side. There we go. The Goblin Ringleader here. 4 mana, 2/2, haste, enters the battlefield, reveal the top 4 cards of your library, put all Goblin cards revealed this way into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So if you want to build the Tribal Goblins deck for Standard, you're definitely going to want to pick up some number of Legion Warboss. Fantastic, fantastic Goblin to pick up. But also at the same time, when we look forward towards the future, after Core Set 2020, we're going to have another set coming after that, and once that set is released, we're going to have certain sets rotating out of Standard. We're going to have Ixalan, Rivals of Ixalan, Dominaria, as well as Core Set 2019, all rotating out of Standard in about 3 months when the next set were to come out. And the Legion Warboss is still going to be in Standard after that rotation happens, and the Legion Warboss is most likely going to see play after that rotation happens as well. This seems just like a very good pick, both in terms of if you're picking it up to potentially sell it back after the price would go up, or if you're just picking it up now to use in the future. If you're thinking about what decks you might want to build as we look forward to rotation or look towards rotation, Legion Warboss is the kind of card that you can pick up saying, I know that this card is potentially still going to be very good after the rotation hits, so it could be a fine time for me to pick this up now in preparation for the future. So I really like Legion Warboss, both that it works well with the upcoming Goblin Ringleader for the Goblin Tribals deck, as well as I like the fact that it's going to hold its value as we look forward to rotation happening in just a few months. So with that being said, I'll go through these one more time really quickly. I picked out Sigh, Master Thopterist, Scape Shift, Mauve Nexus, Deseret, Artifice, Master, Blood Sun, as well as Legion Warboss as 6 early picks for MTG Finance selections here for the Core Set 2020 during preview season. Of course, at the end of each of my videos, or sometimes even during the beginning or the middle of the video now that I think about it, I like to remind everyone that this video, as well as all others here on the channel, are brought to you by CardSphere. So if you're interested in picking up, a Sigh, a Scape Shift, an Mauve Nexus, a Deseret, a Blood Sun, or a Legion Warboss, try heading over to CardSphere and see if you can pick them up. It's a great way to trade off the unwanted cards that you have for the cards that you're going to be using, and it's a great way to get cards even at potentially a lower price too. If we go ahead, let's just go ahead and do one example real quick. We'll start off with the Deseret, I guess. We'll go Deseret Artifice Master, market price of $671. How much can I get a Deseret for on CardSphere? So Deseret, or I guess it's Artifice Master, right? Artifice, sure. So $698 there. Looks like people are trading these at about $5, $5.18, $4.95 based off of these past transactions. So when we think about a $5 Deseret, that's already shaving off another $1.75 from what the market value is. So you could go potentially pick up a Deseret for even less than what the market is, and then increase your profits. Could potentially be there. You can see someone right now is already offering $5 and 98 of them at $5, and it could be a fantastic pickup. this Deseret as well as any of the other cards I mentioned before. So again, thank you to CardSphere for sponsoring this video as well as all other videos here on the channel. If you guys did enjoy the video and are interested in letting me know some of your specs down low in the comment section, I'd love to hear them. And I'd love to hear if you guys did enjoy the video as well. With that being said, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys here next time for another Magic the Gathering video.